Sons and Lovers by D.H. Lawrence. Chapter 1. The Early Years. The novel opens with the life of the Morel family. Walter Morel, a coal miner, marries Gertrude, a woman of higher aspirations, who comes from a more refined background. Gertrude soon becomes disillusioned with Walter's crude nature and lack of ambition, leading to a strained relationship. They live in a small mining town where Walter's work in the coal mines does not provide the wealth Gertrude envisioned. Despite his shortcomings, Walter has a deep affection for Gertrude, which she resents. This conflict shapes the family's atmosphere, with Gertrude often feeling burdened by her husband's inability to rise above his station in life. When their children are born, Gertrude's primary focus becomes raising them, particularly her son Paul, whom she dotes on excessively. From an early age, Paul stands out as her favorite, and the bond between mother and son becomes the novel's central theme. Chapter 2. The Family Struggles. The Morel family faces constant financial strain, and Gertrude grows more bitter. She often feels trapped in her marriage, blaming Walter for their struggles. Despite his flaws, Walter does love his family, but his physical and emotional distance leaves Gertrude dissatisfied. As the children grow, they become increasingly aware of the tension at home. Paul, being sensitive and intelligent, is particularly affected by the deteriorating relationship between his parents. He becomes a kind of mediator between his mother and father, though he's too young to fully understand the complexities of adult relationships. Chapter 3. Paul's development. Paul Morel is a sensitive boy with a vivid imagination. He excels in school, drawing the attention of his teachers and peers. However, his emotional life is far from stable. His mother's overwhelming love suffocates him, and he grows more isolated from others, especially from his father. Despite his academic successes, Paul feels a deep sense of loneliness, which he attributes to his family's disjointed relationships. Paul begins to form an attachment to a girl named Miriam, who is gentle and intellectual. However, their relationship is marked by a deep emotional intensity, which causes Paul to become conflicted. While he is attracted to Miriam, he cannot seem to free himself from his mother's overpowering influence. Chapter 4. Conflict of affections. As Paul matures, he continues his relationship with Miriam, but he grows increasingly distant from her. Their bond is marked by a quiet intensity, and Miriam's idealism contrasts with Paul's emotional turmoil. The relationship is troubled by Paul's desire to break free from his mother, but he cannot escape her hold on him. Miriam believes in the purity of love and is deeply emotionally invested in Paul. However, Paul's feelings are more complex. He is torn between his growing love for Miriam and his guilt over the way he treats her. At the same time, his mother Gertrude remains an ever-present influence in his life, though he is beginning to feel the first stirrings of independence. Chapter 5: The Influence of Mrs. Morel. As Paul continues to struggle with his feelings for Miriam, his mother becomes increasingly ill. Gertrude's emotional and physical decline adds to the tension in the family. Paul feels obligated to care for her, though it further complicates his relationships with others. Despite Gertrude's sickness, she remains the center of Paul's world. She encourages his artistic pursuits, fueling his desire to be a writer. However, the emotional demands she places on him make it difficult for Paul to form a fully independent identity. He becomes increasingly aware of the destructive nature of his mother's love, but he cannot bring himself to break free from it. Chapter 6: Paul's internal struggle. Paul's life continues to be marked by internal conflict. He is deeply in love with Miriam, but he feels torn between her and the overwhelming bond with his mother. He begins to experience a more profound sense of emotional exhaustion, torn between his desires and his obligations. As his mother's illness worsens, Paul's guilt deepens. He feels a deep sense of responsibility to her, but he is also frustrated by her inability to let him live his own life. This frustration grows as he feels more and more imprisoned by her love, which he cannot escape. Chapter 7: Miriam's Heartbreak. Miriam's love for Paul becomes more intense, but she begins to sense that Paul is not fully committed to her. She feels abandoned and heartbroken by his emotional distance. However, Paul continues to struggle with his feelings, uncertain about what he wants. He is deeply fond of Miriam, but he cannot give himself fully to her, feeling that something is holding him back. Their relationship begins to unravel as Paul becomes more involved in his writing, seeking an escape from the emotional turmoil he experiences at home. Miriam's feelings of rejection grow, and she eventually decides to end the relationship, despite her lingering love for him. Chapter 8: The Tragic Death of Mrs. Morel. Gertrude's health continues to deteriorate, and Paul's emotional turmoil reaches its peak. He is overwhelmed by the demands of caring for his mother and by the guilt he feels for not being able to escape her influence. Despite his growing resentment, Paul remains devoted to her, and he is devastated when she dies. The loss of his mother marks a turning point in Paul's life. He is left feeling emptied, lost, with a sense of guilt and regret hanging over him. Without his mother's presence, Paul is forced to confront his own emotional needs and desires. Chapter 9, A New Beginning. After his mother's death, Paul tries to move on with his life, but he is still emotionally haunted by the past. He reconnects with Miriam, but their relationship remains complicated. Paul realizes that he cannot completely sever his connection to his mother's influence, and he is still unsure what he truly wants. Paul finds himself drawn to another woman, Clara, who is more independent and emotionally distant than Miriam. He is attracted to Clara's strengths, and their relationship becomes more intense. However, Paul continues to struggle with his feelings, torn between his past with Miriam and his growing love for Clara. Chapter 10, A Final Decision. As the novel concludes, Paul is faced with a final choice. He is no longer controlled by his mother's love, but he remains deeply conflicted about his emotional future. The novel ends ambiguously, with Paul still seeking resolution in his relationships with the women in his life. Ultimately, the novel leaves readers with a sense of uncertainty. Paul's journey reflects the struggle to break free from the past and form an independent identity. His relationships with women Miriam, Clara, and his mother serve as a mirror for his own internal battles, and the novel ends with Paul still searching for peace. In Sons and Lovers, D.H. Lawrence explores the complexities of family relationships, the bonds between mothers and sons, and the difficulties of growing up in a world shaped by societal expectations and personal desires. Through Paul Morrell's emotional journey, the novel touches on themes of love, guilt, and the struggle for independence, making it a poignant exploration of human relationships.